The oxygen monitor above the crib had been chirping for 16 minutes straight. Not the screaming alarm of a true emergency, but that low, maddening pulse that said something was wrong and getting worse. Baby Cale Riordan, 3 months old and barely 8 pounds, lay in the center of the hotel nursery with his tiny chest, working too hard for a child his age. Each breath a visible labored effort beneath skin stretched pale over his ribs like tissue paper. Gavin Riordan stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of the suite's master bedroom, a glass of scotch untouched in his hand, staring at the lights of Cole Harbour shimmering across Burrard Inlet. He was 41 years old, built like a man who had survived things that should have killed him, and he had not slept in 4 days. Behind him, 2 of his most senior men stood near the door. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that hadn't been said, and nothing that had been said had done any good. The neonatologist from Vancouver General had left an hour ago with his clipboard and his careful language. Before him had come a team of allergists flown in from Toronto, and before them, the specialist from BC Children's, who had used the phrase "failure to thrive" in a voice so deliberately gentle it had felt like a physical insult. They had poked and scanned and drawn blood from Cale's impossibly small veins until the crooks of his arms were bruised yellow. Their conclusion was always the same: no medical explanation for why the baby rejected every formula they tried. His digestive system was in revolt. His weight had dropped twice from an already critical baseline. One doctor had suggested, cautiously, that the stress of his early birth might have left his system compromised beyond what intervention could correct. Gavin had put his fist through the bathroom mirror after the man left. Siobhan had been gone for 3 months. The car bomb on the upper levels highway, meant for Gavin, detonated instead when Siobhan took his Range Rover to pick up groceries on a Tuesday afternoon, had killed her instantly. She had been 7 months pregnant. The trauma surgeons at VGH had delivered Cale in the first minutes after, pulling him from the wreckage with a thin, reedy cry that sounded nothing like a sound that could keep going. Somehow it had. Gavin had destroyed the men responsible, every last one, in ways that still occasionally surfaced in the Vancouver Sun's crime section as unresolved investigations. None of it could make his son eat. Mira Colbert had been working the top floor of the Fairmont Pacific Rim for 6 weeks, which was long enough to know which guests tipped well and which ones left disaster zones, and long enough to know that Suite 3201, permanently leased to something called Pacific Rim Logistics, was staffed by men who made her deeply uncomfortable in a way she had learned to respect as useful instinct. She kept her head down, changed the linens, restocked the minibar, did not make eye contact. Tonight, she was pushing her housekeeping cart past the service corridor when she heard it. Or rather, when the part of her brain that she had spent 14 months trying to silence snapped awake without her permission. A monitor alarm, low, continuous, and underneath it, through the cracked corridor door, the sound of a baby making no sound at all, when a baby under that kind of physiological stress absolutely should have been screaming. Mira stopped walking. She had been a pediatric nurse at BC Children's Hospital for 4 years before a documentation dispute with her supervisor ended her career. It had started when Mira reported Dr. Leonard Chu, senior and well-connected and wrong, for administering the incorrect dosage to a 6-year-old post-operative patient. It had ended 9 months later, with Mira's nursing license suspended and her professional reputation effectively buried. She'd lost her apartment in Kitsilano. She had been 7 months pregnant when the review board delivered their verdict, and the shock of it, her obstetrician would tell her later, had likely contributed to the placental abruption that came 2 weeks after. She had delivered a daughter at 34 weeks who lived 9 hours and 22 minutes and never opened her eyes. Mira had taken the housekeeping job because it asked nothing of her except to show up and disappear into the walls. She was not supposed to hear this alarm. She was not supposed to care about it. She pushed the corridor door open anyway. The converted nursery was dim and sterile smelling, the kind of space assembled with money rather than warmth. A clinical-grade crib, imported furniture that matched nothing, monitoring equipment that cost more than most families made in a year. The night nurse hired by whoever managed this suite was asleep in the corner armchair with her reading glasses still on her face. And in the crib a baby boy was silently struggling. Mira was at the side of the crib before she had consciously decided to move. She took one look at the color creeping in at the edges of his lips, that particular slate gray she had seen in pediatric emergency and never forgotten, and her hands moved the way 4 years of training had made them move, automatic, precise, without hesitation. She pressed the emergency call button on the monitor panel. Then she reached into the crib and repositioned Cale onto his side, tilting his chin, checking his airway with 2 fingers the way she had done 100 times in a different life. "Hey," she said quietly. "I've got you, little one." His eyelids fluttered. Something shifted in his breathing. Some minute response to being handled by someone who understood what they were doing, and the monitor's pitch began its slow, grudging climb back toward the safe range. Mira did not hear the door open behind her. "Step away from my son." The voice was quiet and controlled in the way that voices were when the person speaking had long stopped needing volume to be frightening. Mira went very still. She did not let go of the baby. She turned slowly. Gavin Riordan filled the doorway. White shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, gun in hand, two large men in the corridor behind him. His eyes moved from Mira to Cale and back to Mira with the flat, methodical efficiency of a man cataloguing a threat. "His airway was partially obstructed," Mira said. Her voice came out steadier than she'd expected. "I cleared it. His oxygen saturation was dropping." "Who are you?" "Housekeeping." I heard the monitor from the service corridor. She did not move back from the crib, because she was not going to set this baby down incorrectly regardless of what was being pointed at her head. "If you're going to shoot me, at least wait until I'm sure he's stable." The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Gavin crossed the remaining distance to the crib and looked down at his son. Cale's chest was rising and falling with something closer to regularity than it had managed in days. The bluish tinge at his mouth was retreating. The gun lowered fractionally. "Get Dr. Ma on the phone." He looked at Mira. "You don't move." She didn't. By 2 in the morning, Mira's life had been laid out on the suite's dining room table by a man named Faris, who produced information about people with the detached efficiency of someone pulling files from a well-organized cabinet. Mira Ann Colbert, 27, former registered pediatric nurse, BC Children's Hospital. License suspended 14 months ago following an internal review, initiated by Supervisor Dorothy Shu after Colbert filed a complaint against Dr. Leonard Chu for a medication incident with a pediatric patient. Review board sided with the hospital. Colbert did not appeal. Faris set the tablet on the table. 6 weeks in housekeeping here. Prior to that, waitressing in Kitsilano. Currently being pressured by associates of a Bradley Norris, former boyfriend, 34, who owes approximately $40,000 to loan sharks operating out of the downtown east side. Gavin stood by the window. He had not sat down. "And the baby," he said. Dr. Ma confirmed Colbert's intervention, prevented what she's calling a significant hypoxic episode. Faris paused. "She knows what she's doing." Mira sat in a straight-backed chair across the room with her hands folded in her lap. She had moved past fear somewhere around the point when it became clear that Gavin Riordan's entire attention, all of the considerable force of him, was fixed not on her as a threat, but on the boy sleeping in the next room. That reoriented things considerably. Gavin turned from the window. "Your ex is dead. The people he owes, they've approached you directly." "Twice," she kept her voice even. "They know where I work." "They won't come again." He said it like he was noting a fact about weather. "Faris will sort it." "What does that mean for me?" He crossed the room and sat down across from her, the first ordinarily human thing she'd seen him do. "It means you're no longer in housekeeping. Cale has had 6 medical professionals in this hotel in 2 weeks. None of them did what you did in 45 seconds. I need someone who reacts, not someone who calls a number and waits. I don't have a license." "I don't need your license. I need your judgment." He looked at her steadily. "And you're not going to say no. You don't know that. You held on to that baby when I walked in with a gun. You didn't let go." Something moved in his expression, not warmth exactly, but the recognition of a quality he understood. "You're not going to leave him." She hated that he was right. The terms were unambiguous, a private suite adjacent to the nursery. A salary she would not have believed if the number had come from anyone else. Cale's care as her sole responsibility. She would not leave the property without an escort. She would tell no one her location. In exchange, Bradley Norris's debt would be cleared, his access to her permanently removed, and she would lack for nothing she could reasonably name. It was not a negotiation. Mira understood that clearly. But she looked at the monitors, at the small pair of socks draped over the edge of the crib rail like a signal of pure, exhausted love, and she said yes. The days settled into something she had not expected, a rhythm. She learned Cale's patterns the way she had learned every infant in her care at BC Children's. By paying attention, by staying in the room when it would have been easier to step out, by trusting the particular vocabulary of his restlessness and his ease. He gained weight slowly at first, then with increasing conviction. He began to stay awake for longer intervals, his dark eyes tracking Mira's face with the focused intensity that very young infants used before they had language for the things they knew. She ate her meals from a tray the kitchen sent up, worked her way through the books she requested, and Faris procured without comment and answered the texts from no one because there was no one left to text. Somewhere in the third week, she stopped counting days. Gavin visited the nursery every evening without fail. He never stayed long and rarely said much. He would stand at the edge of the crib and watch his son with an expression Mira had come to recognize as grief wearing the clothes of relief. A man who had stopped trusting good things, watching a good thing happen, and still not quite believing it would last. Once, when Cale had been particularly fretful, and Mira had finally gotten him settled after nearly 2 hours of rocking, Gavin appeared in the doorway and stood there in silence. "You lost a child," he said. Mira looked at the baby in her arms. She lived 9 hours. "I'm simple, no performance in it." "I know you understand what that is," she said. He looked at the baby. Siobhan would have been, she'd have known exactly what to do, all of it, the kind of certainty some people are born with. He was quiet for a moment. "I know how to protect things. I don't know how to tend them. You're here every night." "That's not the same." "It's something," Mira said. "It's not nothing." He looked at her. She looked back. In the crib, Cale sighed and settled deeper into sleep. It was Donald Riordan's third visit to the suite that changed the temperature of things. Gavin's younger brother was charming in the way certain objects were charming. Polished, appealing, hollow under the surface. He brought things for Cale, spoke warmly about Siobhan, asked Mira questions about herself with the practiced interest of a man who had learned to seem curious without being it. When she declined his offer to sit with the baby so she could take a break, his smile stayed exactly where it had been, not a flicker of adjustment. She had worked long enough in pediatric care to know what a person looked like when they were bracing themselves around a sick child. That compressed, fearful vigilance. Donald Riordan looked at his nephew the way someone looked at a problem they expected to resolve itself, given time. She started paying close attention after that. 4 days later she found it. She had gone to the medical refrigerator in the suite's back kitchen to prepare Cale's evening formula, a specialized preparation ordered in sealed batches from a pharmacy supplier in Richmond. She was reaching for the next bottle in sequence when she noticed the tamper-evident seal on the bottle at the front of the shelf. A hairline lift along the bottom edge, barely visible. Packaging defect, possibly. She had almost put it back. She unscrewed the cap instead. The smell reached her before anything else registered. Under the familiar, faintly sweet scent of the formula, something else. Bitter. Almost medicinal, but not quite, with a faintly organic undertone that activated something deep in her memory. A toxicology case study in her second year of nursing school. A toddler brought into a Surrey emergency room after ingesting rosary pea seeds from a houseplant. Abrin. Slow-acting, cumulative, metabolized in ways that standard hospital toxicology panels were not routinely calibrated to detect. The child had survived. Not all did. Mira set the bottle down very carefully on the counter. Behind her, the service door clicked open. "You're sharper than he said." She turned. A woman stood in the doorway, compact, late 50s, wearing a corporate concierge visitor badge. Mira had seen her handling floor arrangements for the suite. She was holding a small, suppressed pistol with the ease of someone for whom this was not an unusual Thursday evening. "Mr. Donnell had concerns," the woman said, stepping into the kitchen and letting the door swing shut behind her. "You were getting too curious." Mira's heart was slamming against her ribs. She kept her face level. Her eyes moved across the counter. The open formula bottle, the heavy stainless steel prep bowl, the electric kettle on its heating element. She had made tea an hour ago, had not switched it off. "How long?" Mira said. "Before you arrived." The woman's voice was businesslike, a drop per feed, enough to accumulate, enough to look like a very sad and natural deterioration. By Christmas, the poor little boy would have simply stopped. She tilted her head. "And you are going to." Mira picked up the prep bowl and threw it directly at her face. It was not an elegant throw. It didn't need to be. The steel edge caught the bridge of the woman's nose with enough force to make her head sideways, and the reflex, the pure involuntary animal reflex of pain, jerked her weapon arm wide. The shot that discharged hit the tile backsplash 2 feet from Mira's ear. Mira was already moving. She grabbed the kettle off its element, still scalding from the tea, the steam curling white from the spout, and swung it in a hard arc into the woman's shoulder and forearm. The sound the woman made was immediate and animal. She stumbled back hard into the doorframe. The gun skittered across the kitchen tile. Mira kicked it under the refrigerator unit with her heel and ran for the nursery. She got to Cale, lifted him from the crib in one motion, pressed him to her chest, and crossed the room to the locked side cabinet where she kept the backup formula she had purchased herself. Under her own name, from a pharmacy in Yaletown, telling no one, and she sat down on the floor in the corner with her back to the wall, the baby against her chest, and she dialed Gavin's number. He picked up on the first ring. "The formula's poisoned," she said. "Abrin, I think. It won't show on a standard panel. Donald is behind it. There's a woman here, works hotel concierge. She came at me in the kitchen. She's down. Cale is with me. We're in the nursery." There was a beat of silence. Not shock, she would understand later, but something colder and more deliberate than shock. "Don't open the door for anyone," Gavin said. "I'm 4 minutes away." It was 3.5. The nursery door came open in a way that suggested the word knock had not entered the conversation. Gavin came through with Burke and 2 other men behind him and swept the room in one look. His eyes found Mira on the floor, found Cale in her arms, and something moved across his face that he made no effort to conceal. He crossed the room and crouched in front of her. His hands, the same hands that had been holding a weapon the first night she'd seen him, came up to her face with a different kind of precision, careful and deliberate, checking the cut at her temple where a tile fragment had caught her on the rebound. "He's all right," Mira said. "I didn't let her near him." "I know." His voice was rough at the edges. "Faris pulled the kitchen cameras. We have everything." He looked at her steadily. "You fought her alone." There wasn't time to do anything else. Something shifted in his expression. "No," he agreed, "there wasn't." In the kitchen behind them, his men were working through whatever came next. Mira could hear the woman's voice, brief and then not, and Burke's quiet final instructions. She did not go in there. She held Cale and listened to his breathing, which was even and good and unremarkable in the best possible way. Gavin stayed crouched in front of her. He did not seem in any hurry to be elsewhere. "Donald," Mira said. "Being handled." His jaw set once. He made a calculation. The family trust reverts to him if Cale doesn't survive to the terms of inheritance. He's been working this since before Shioban was in the ground. He said it with the flatness of someone who has looked at something unspeakable long enough that the shock of it has worn smooth. He will not make any further calculations. Mira thought she understood what that meant. She did not ask him to confirm it. They moved in the small hours of the morning. A property in West Vancouver that Gavin held under a name connected to his own only through 3 layers of holding company, set back from Marine Drive on 2 acres of Douglas fir with a view of Howe Sound. The drive over the Lion's Gate was quiet, the convoy of vehicles moving through a city that looked ordinary and was not. The safe house was warm inside, staffed by 2 people Mira didn't know, but who seemed to know exactly what was needed and provided it without being asked. Mira was given a room adjoining the nursery. She put Cale in the travel crib, watched his chest rise and fall for longer than was strictly necessary, and then went to stand at the window. Howe Sound was dark below them. The lights of the BC ferries crossing to Langdale made slow amber arcs across the water. "He's doing better," Gavin's voice came from behind her. She turned. He was in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her rather than the baby. "He's gaining." She turned back to the window. "Once we confirm the formula supply is clean and the Abrin clears his system, he should." She stopped. "He'll be okay. He'll be okay now." Gavin walked into the room. He stopped a few feet away, and they stood in silence for a moment with the water below them, and the child sleeping behind them, and the particular quality of quiet that follows a crisis that has been survived. "What you said earlier, about losing your license," he said. "About doing the right thing and it costing you everything." "It's done," Mira said. "I've made peace with it." "You shouldn't have to make peace with it." He said it plainly, without sentiment. "You reported a man who was hurting children. They punished you for it. That is not a thing to be at peace with." Mira was quiet for a moment. The ferry lights moved steadily across the Sound. "I was going to be invisible," she said finally. "That was the plan. Just get through days. Not look too closely at anything." She glanced at the travel crib. "He made that plan impossible." "He has a talent for that," Gavin said. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before, the softest edge of rye. He reached out and rested one hand on the back of the travel crib, looking at his son with the expression she had learned meant he was letting himself believe in something. Then his eyes came up to hers. "Stay," he said, not a command, the first thing he had said to her that wasn't. Not as an employee, as stay. She held his gaze. Then she looked at Cale, who slept with his fist curled against his cheek, oblivious to the fact that an entire criminal architecture had just been dismantled and reconstructed in his name. Gavin reached out slowly and touched her face, one hand steady and warm at her jaw, and leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead. Not a quick gesture, but a held one, deliberate and careful and irrevocable, his breath warm against her hair. They stayed like that for a moment. 3 people in the small circle of lamplight, the water dark below, the mountains invisible in the cloud. In the morning, Gavin gathered his people in the main room and told them plainly about Mira Colbert and what she was in this house. He was not a man who hedged or left interpretation to chance. His people received it with the gravity it deserved. Mira stood at the window with Cale in the amber early light, watching the sound begin to take on color as the sun came through the gap in the mountains. Cale was awake, alert and hungry, and emphatically unimpressed by the scenic backdrop or the events of the preceding 12 hours. "All right, I hear you." She had come to this city with nothing she intended to hold on to. She had not expected a 3-month-old boy with the stubbornest grip she had ever felt on a person's finger, or a man who looked at her like she was the only uncomplicated true thing in a life that had been complicated for a very long time. She fed Cale his morning bottle in the light coming off Howe Sound, and she did not look away.